My name is Ceri Sumner. I'm the Customer Access and Development Manager. One of my main responsibilities within Customer Access is management of the complaints function. We have a dedicated complaints team within Norfolk County Council who manage and investigate complaints on behalf of departments. The first thing that happens when a complaint comes into the team is an assessment to see if there are any safeguarding issues related to the complaint. The customer's safety and well-being is always of paramount importance, so the first thing is an initial assessment to see is there any impending danger or safety concern about that individual, and if there is, that's obviously passed off to the appropriate team. From that point, the case is then allocated to a case manager who will make contact with the complainant and try to really summarise what they've understood from the letter or email or other form of contact that may have come into us, and really try and get to the bottom of what is it that's driven that complaint in the first place. Following on from that, sometimes they're then able to resolve that complaint immediately where there's been a misunderstanding about service provision or a miscommunication, and that we would refer to that as an informal complaint because it's been managed and the customer's been helped in that first instance. But if it's something more serious and more complex, the complaints case manager will then take it on behalf of that customer, do some initial investigation, and if required, put it through a more formal complaints process. There are various statutory guidelines laid down for different categories of complaints. So some of the children's complaints might fall under a Children's Act legislation, in which case it's quite clear the timescales that are set out. In reality, the complaints team will try and deal with the complaint as quickly as possible, do an initial investigation as quickly as possible, because a prolonged experience is not necessarily beneficial for the customer or service user. The average complaint at a formal level should be dealt with within about 15 to 20 days, but it obviously depends on the number of different organisations who are involved. Sometimes they can be multi-agency and put into an investigation. Sometimes we would need to set up a number of interviews with different individuals and to get the customer or service user to be part of that, and that can obviously extend the time dependent on people's availability and the complexity of the issues at stake. First and foremost, the complaints function is there to help the individual who feels that they have had an injustice, a lack of service, or a service carried out in the wrong way. So our first priority is to make sure that that individual feels that they've been listened to, and that if possible things have been put right, or you've taken a restorative approach to sorting things out for them. But I think the second priority is that we learn from that as an organisation. We look for early indicators that there might be underlying problems, particularly where we've got a commission service that's being delivered through a third party. You know, are comments and feedback starting to come in that might indicate an underlying problem? And obviously it highlights any problems with our own processes, practices, procedures, and we've got numerous examples where a complaint has either given us a practical idea about how to do things differently, or has helped us to improve how we deliver services on an ongoing basis, both within adults and children's services. The majority of complaints that we get relating to social care are usually can be attributed to a misunderstanding about service delivery. So there's usually a gap between the expectation that the customer or service user has and the service that they've then experienced. Now that might well be that their expectations were not well managed in the first place, or it might well be that the service delivery wasn't up to standard. So whatever has caused that underlying issue, needs to be addressed. So it might be that we need to provide better communication or manage customers' expectations more sensitively or more accurately, or it might well be that we need to look at the service delivery. We do quite often find that communication is a key issue, that we could be clearer in our web communications, in our communications that our social care practitioners use on a day-to-day basis in helping customers to understand what they are entitled to, what they can expect from a service, and usually that will start to even out some of those problems. Yeah, often the complaints that we get related to social care are around communications and people not knowing at what point they will be communicated to, or not feeling that they've had enough communication throughout a process. So we're doing quite a lot of work internally to say, can we better manage expectations around at what points in a process you'll be communicated, and in some instances upping the level of communication within a certain process. Another area for complaint is around financial information, personal budgets, people's ability to understand what they're entitled to, what they can spend money on, how those scenarios play out. So again, we've worked with our practitioners to make sure that they're really clear in their communication to customers around how these things work, and therefore that the expectations are better managed at an earlier stage. We also have complaints where people feel that things have taken too long, and in those cases sometimes there are statutory reasons why things can take a long time, but in other situations we've looked at reducing the timescales. So blue badge applications would be one example where we used to receive quite a few comments and concerns about the length of time involved. So we've overhauled that process, we've looked at improving it, and we've looked at better communicating what's involved in that situation, being clearer on the criteria that's required and that kind of thing. At the moment, the complaints service is run from a central team, and I think that really gives people an easy way of complaining. It's very clear, it's very straightforward, and the case managers are able to take on complaints on behalf of the service user, the resident. In terms of improving that process, I think what would make it better is better integration of technology, better visibility of customer records between agencies in Norfolk, so that the investigations could be speeded up, could be expedited by having more transparency around the experiences that a customer has been through, and then being able to see whether there has been a genuine service failure and where that could be resolved, or a different process put in place in future. So I think technology's got a part to play, and I think that would also help to reduce the timescales and be able to resolve complaints in a quicker way for the customer.